الفاس.
That, bro.
Hi, so after observing this war for nearly 1 week, I finished the grind and put together an Iran war update for you. The probability that this update will be suppressed by YouTube, as already happened with my last update about Iran, is quite high, but I made it anyway. So here is everything you need to know after 1 week of war and combat operations, as well as a number of things that most likely nobody else has told you about this war so far, such as the secret superweapon the Americans have deployed here, or who the actual recipient of the Iranian retaliation strikes really is. If you appreciate my efforts, please show it with a like, share, and comment, and also feel free to subscribe. As I said, this one needs your help even more than the Ukraine war updates. But let's go. What you just saw was the exact moment an Israeli fighter dodged an Iranian surface-to-air missile over the skies of Tehran, as the city below was burning under the immense pressure of combined Israeli and American air power. According to the US Central Command, more than 1,700 targets across Iran were hit by the US military in just the first 72 hours of Operation Epic Fury. This is the name given to the operation aimed at wiping out the Iranian leadership, its capability to build and launch ballistic missiles, and its nuclear ambitions. An official release by the White House furthermore listed the destruction of Iran's navy as one of the main goals of the operation. In this context, a US submarine managed to sink an Iranian ship in the first confirmed torpedo kill since World War II. This here is footage of that incident. The Iranian frigate was transiting the Indian Ocean when it was sunk, but we will return to the Iranian Navy later. The opening phase of the operation consisted of a series of preemptive and still ongoing decapitation strikes. Here we see airstrikes on the IRGC headquarters in northern Tehran. Here we have footage released by the IDF showing a wave of strikes on Hezbollah command centers in Beirut. And here we see an image from the aftermath of the strike that killed Iran's supreme leader on the first day of the war. These decapitation strikes are currently an ongoing process. This means that whenever leadership positions are filled again, the Americans and Israelis attempt to eliminate those individuals immediately. So far, this strategy appears to have been so successful that even Trump himself said it is unclear who, when, or how anyone can currently take over the leadership of the country. But listen for yourself.
Do you have someone in mind right now? Because you said all the people you did have in mind have been taken out. What do you think?
Well, most of the people we had in mind are dead. So, we had some in mind from that group that is dead. And now we have another group, they may be dead also, based on reports. So I guess you have a third wave coming in. Pretty soon we're not going to know anybody.
With successful, I mean that they are repeatedly cutting off the head of the metaphorical hydra whenever it grows back. I will not go into the long-term consequences this could have for Iran or the wider region. I understand that there is certainly room for criticism of this strategy, but since I am not a lawyer, I will leave that discussion aside for now. Instead, I will let Secretary of State Marco Rubio speak for himself, as he has justified the current approach here.
Listen, let me explain to you guys this in simple English. Okay? Iran is run by lunatics, religious fanatic lunatics. They have an ambition to have nuclear weapons. They intend to develop those nuclear weapons behind a program of missiles and drones and terrorism that the world will not be able to touch them for fear of those things. And this is the weakest they've ever been. Now is the time to go after them. The president made the decision to go after them, take away their missiles, take away their navy, take away their drones, take away their ability to make those things so that they can never have a nuclear weapon. That's why the president made this decision. It was the right decision. And the world will be a safer place when these radical clerics no longer have access to these weapons. You see how they're using them now. Imagine how they would use them a year from now if they had more of these.
Trump also laid out the reasons for the actions taken by the United States and once again explained his views on the Iranian regime.
if we don't stop them, or if we didn't stop them, or if we didn't start, they've been decimated. But if we didn't do what we're doing right now, you would have had a nuclear war, and they would have taken out many countries, because you know what? They're sick people. They're mentally ill, sick people. They're angry, they're crazy, they're sick.
After the series of decapitation strikes that occurred on the first day, the Americans and Israelis moved on to their next primary objective of the war, the degradation of Iran's offensive capabilities, particularly in the area of ballistic missiles. For now, this appears to be progressing quite successfully so far, as a large number of videos have been released showing the degradation of Iran's strike capabilities. According to reports, the number of ballistic missile attacks on US bases, Israel, and the Gulf states has also decreased significantly in recent days. Some observers have even spoken of a 1-to-1 ratio between ballistic missile launches and the subsequent destruction of the launch systems, which would be quite remarkable. To answer the question of whether and how something like this could even be possible, the answer is yes, and the key is artificial intelligence. Let's start with the raw numbers because they matter. In the first 24 hours of Operation Epic Fury, the US and Israel struck over 1,000 targets across Iran. By hour 72, that number had climbed past 1,700, and by the 100-hour mark over 2,000 targets. To put that in perspective, the entire 2003 invasion of Iraq took weeks to accumulate comparable strike numbers. What we're seeing here is a compression of military tempo that was simply not possible before. So how was AI involved in the strikes? The answer lies in an AI weapons stack built around systems such as Maven, Palantir, and Claude. At the foundation is the Maven Smart System. This is a Pentagon-led AI defense platform built and maintained by the defense technology company Palantir. You can think of it as an operating system for battlefield intelligence. It ingests massive streams of classified data, including satellite imagery, drone footage, radio intercepts, signals intelligence, and human intelligence reports, and fuses all of this information together in real time. Inside this system, acting as the central reasoning engine, sits Claude. Claude processes the fused data and helps analysts interpret it. Rather than simply storing information, it analyzes patterns, connects different data points, generates assessments, and produces recommendations that can support operational decisions. Then, on top of this stack sits GenAI.mil, the Pentagon's secure AI platform. It allows systems like Claude to be used by commanders and analysts across both classified and unclassified military networks worldwide. Claude is particularly interesting here because it was used for 3 core functions: intelligence assessments, target identification, and the simulation of battle scenarios. Every second of the conflict, a torrent of classified data flows in: live satellite imagery, drone footage, radio intercepts, reports from the ground, trustworthy OSINT information, and more. Claude processes all of this simultaneously, not one stream after the other, but all at once in real time. From these assessments, it generates strike packages, precise GPS coordinates, recommended munitions for each target type, estimated collateral damage calculations, and legal pre-screening for compliance with the rules of engagement. All of this is produced automatically at machine speed and ranked by priority, allowing hundreds of targets to be managed at the same time. Before each strike sequence, Claude runs real-time, what-if simulations, essentially wargaming the potential Iranian response. This allows commanders to sequence strikes in a way that preempts Iranian counter-moves rather than simply reacting to them. After each strike, Claude analyzes incoming post-strike data such as drone footage, infrared signatures, and SIGINT to determine whether the target was destroyed, damaged, or missed. Surviving targets are immediately pushed back up the priority list. The result is a continuous operational loop: strike, assess, reprioritize, strike again, running at a pace no human team could match. The use of Claude is also interesting because hours before the first missiles started flying, President Donald Trump announced that all federal agencies must immediately stop using Anthropic's Claude. He called Anthropic a, and I am quoting directly, radical left AI company run by people who have no idea what the real world is all about. The reason Claude was still used was apparently that it would take at least 3 months to replace its capabilities with an alternative platform. I would like to return to the Iranian Navy for a moment. In relation to the ship that was sunk by a submarine, Defense Secretary Hegseth made the following statement. He also commented on further successes against the Iranian Navy.
In fact, yesterday, in the Indian Ocean, An American submarine sunk an Iranian warship that thought it was safe in international waters. Instead, it was sunk by a torpedo. Quiet death. The first sinking of an enemy ship by a torpedo since World War II. Like in that war, back when we were still the War Department, we are fighting to win. In fact, last night, we sunk their prize ship, the Soleimani. Looks like POTUS got him twice. Their Navy not a factor. Pick your adjective, it is no more.
It seems that at sea, America's and Israel's dominance has also come to the forefront again, as Iran's navy appears to have been heavily degraded as well, much like its ballistic missile launchers, as numerous satellite images and additional videos suggest. In this case, for example, CENTCOM has published still images from the targeting of the Iris Shahid Sayed Shirazi, or however this is spelled, a Soleimani-class corvette of Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Navy off the coast of Bandar Abbas in the Strait of Hormuz. This here appears to be footage of a highly dense, concentrated mass bombardment inside the city of Tehran, which by the looks of it could very well have been conducted by an American B-52 bomber. There have already been reports that these aircraft have now entered the battle. Their use is interesting in the sense that it likely indicates that the Americans and Israelis have established at least localized air superiority, allowing older and other non-stealth aircraft to operate more freely without the fear of being endangered by Iranian jets or air defense systems. Systems like the B-52 can also carry a very wide range and large quantity of payloads. Because of its enormous payload capacity, over 30 tons of ordnance, the B-52 is particularly suited for large-scale bombardment missions, as well as precision strikes against command centers' infrastructure and air defense systems. Of course, B-2 stealth bombers were also used to strike Iranian targets. Even the B-52's younger brother, the B-1 Lancer, has reportedly been used by now, which means that the United States has made use of its entire strategic bomber fleet over Iran. Along with many of the other assets, it has already thrown into the battle. Especially during the first phase of the war, US forces launched a massive number of advanced precision munitions and cruise missiles against Iranian targets. The strikes focused primarily on Iran's command and control facilities, senior leadership, air defense systems, and radar sites. Here, for example, we can see a swarm of American Tomahawk cruise missiles flying toward Iran. If you have nothing to do right now, you can replay this and try to count them, then write in the comments how many you saw. In times of AI, it's always good to have a sudden cognitive challenge, don't you think? It is estimated that by now the United States has launched hundreds of Tomahawk cruise missiles at targets inside Iran. At the moment, the prevailing view is that Tomahawk missiles can take up to 2 years to produce, meaning there is no quick way to replenish these stockpiles. Together with the heavy use of interceptor missiles from systems such as Patriot or THAAD, this has sparked some criticism within parts of the defense community. Some analysts argue that the current burn rate of expensive precision munitions and interceptor missiles could become problematic if the conflict drags on for an extended period of time. These depletion rates, so the argument goes, could create long-term vulnerabilities in a potential future conflict with China. However, I think that the previously mentioned unprecedented increase in strike effectiveness through AI could mean that the use of these high-precision systems may now be reduced. At least that is what Hexeth suggested.
We used more exquisite standoff munitions at the start, but no longer need to. Our stockpiles of those, as well as Patriots, remains extremely strong.
This assessment also correlates with the data showing a significant decline in the number of Iranian ballistic missile launchers since the beginning of the conflict. I am not saying that the risk mentioned in this criticism does not exist, but it also appears that the effectiveness factor of AI in the rapid degradation of Iran's strike capabilities has not been fully taken into account. So as long as Iran, in terms of ballistic missile launch capabilities, does not have any aces up its sleeve in the eastern parts of the country, I see a good chance that the plan of the current US administration could at least partially succeed, given the insanely high attrition rate we are currently observing. I mean, just as I was writing these lines, this thing here happened, or rather surfaced online. It is a video from Iranian state TV, showing an Iranian ammunition depot going off in Bushehr. In general, there was a pretty huge influx of footage, especially during the first 3 days of the war. But for now, the same pattern can be observed as with the ballistic missile launches. The number of videos coming out of the region has decreased. This likely has something to do with internet blackouts in Iran and a tight OPSEC regime in Israel and the Gulf states, but we will get to that later. After briefly but comprehensively covering the US and Israeli strike campaign, I also need to report on Iran's response so that you can get a more complete picture of the events. So what did Iran's response look like? As already mentioned, it consisted of a flood of ballistic missiles and cheap one-way drones of the Shahed type. However, the bulk of the attacks did not target Israel, but rather another state that one would not necessarily have expected to come under such heavy Iranian retaliation. But which country this is, I will tell you in a moment, after briefly summarizing the presumed logic behind Iran's strikes. First of all, it must be said that the Iranian attacks were not as effective as many had feared. For that reason, I would classify a large number of these strikes simply as retaliatory attacks intended to spread terror. Nevertheless, the Iranian calculus appears to have followed at least a partially mathematical logic, with the hope of creating an attrition effect on the stockpiles of air defense systems used by Israel, the United States, and the other states that became targets of the missiles and drones. Furthermore, Iran has actively tried to degrade the early warning and detection capabilities of the United States, Israel, and their allies by deliberately targeting numerous military installations and radar sites. These attacks definitely occurred, and it appears that some of them were at least partially successful, based on battle damage assessment satellite imagery, but more on that later. The third apparent goal of the Iranian retaliation is to draw the whole region, and potentially the global economy, into chaos by targeting the energy infrastructure of neighboring Gulf countries. The aim here appears to be driving up oil and energy prices, and thereby creating political pressure on the United States, both globally and on the domestic stage. For this purpose, it was not primarily Israel but rather the Gulf states, most notably the United Arab Emirates and the city of Dubai, that became targets of Iranian attacks. This graphic shows the distribution of attacks across the different states. Even though the numbers may have changed slightly by now, the overall trend is clear. The Iranians hope to quickly overwhelm the Emiratis with missiles, who until now had never faced such a barrage before and are generally known to avoid direct confrontation. Iran therefore believed that the Emiratis, as well as the other Gulf states, would quickly buckle and put pressure on the Americans to call off the war. However, this of course did not happen. In fact, it must be said that the Gulf states, and particularly the United Arab Emirates, have so far handled the situation quite bravely and impressively. And I am not saying this because I have worked with one of their defense contractors in the past. In fact, this video is not sponsored, and this is my own honest opinion. The Emiratis have really kept a very cool head so far. This is shown, on the one hand, by the fact that they have so far taken no retaliatory measures against Iran, and that their response has primarily been limited to defensive actions. On the other hand, it is reflected in the extremely high interception rate of Iranian missiles and drones, which currently stands at least 90 to 95%, possibly even slightly higher in some cases. These are really impressive numbers, given the fact that this is the first time they have been under such intense pressure. A huge shout out to the Emirati pilots here, who have been working non-stop to shoot down these missiles and drones. In this context, the UAE Ministry of Defense already released a video a few days ago showing the interception of Iranian missiles and drones. As of March 5, while I am recording this video, the UAE military reported to have intercepted more than 1,000 drones, 8 cruise missiles, and 181 ballistic missiles. Of course, they did not achieve all of this using fighter jets alone. For more than half a decade now, the Emirates have been working with Edge Group to build up their own domestic defense industry, which has resulted in the development of several homegrown air defense systems such as the Skynight for SHORAD purposes. I have reported on this before, and I want to note once again that this is not a sponsorship, this is simply a factual mention. The Iranians themselves also released a few videos showing the interception of 2 Israeli drones, but aside from that there was not much coming from their side except footage of ballistic missile launches. The missiles, with a few exceptions that you can see here now, also did not produce many spectacular images. There are a few impact videos, but not that many overall. One argument is that such footage is simply being suppressed, but from experience I can say that if there were a significant saturating effect caused by a large number of impacts, it would be almost impossible to hide it completely. Therefore, it is highly likely that the number of actual impacts is indeed limited. The most impressive piece of footage in that regard was this video here showing an Iranian ballistic missile avoiding interception by 3 interceptors before crashing into the ground. All of this was filmed by US service members.
There it is. Come on, motherfucker! Second. Come on.
I have to be honest here. The series of interception videos, whether by missiles, close-in weapon systems, helicopters, or fighter jets, has so far appeared far more convincing to me than the somewhat staggering counterstrike of the dying Iranian regime. And now you might accuse me of being paid, biased, or whatever, but this is simply my opinion based on the data and footage I have seen so far. Here, for example, we see something that until recently we had mainly seen in Ukraine. An F-16 shooting down an Iranian drone at very close range in an aerial engagement, filmed by a witness. And here we have intense footage of a Patriot system performing air defense duties in Qatar. We can see that the system is under heavy strain, but it still appears to be doing its job for the most part. One small thing that could be mentioned here is that one of the missiles seems to experience a malfunction. I'm not entirely sure why. It's possible that it tracked a target but wasn't fast enough to intercept it and therefore followed this flight trajectory. Here we have another video showing a similar incident. At first, I thought it was from the same occurrence, but this one was reported to have taken place in Jordan, so I am not entirely sure. Of course, it could also be that the previous video was misattributed to Qatar, or that the one from Jordan was misattributed by Twitter reposters because of the watermark. What is definitely for sure is that this video shows Iran's ballistic missile campaign for what it is, a failure. This missile, filmed from a highway, appears to fall back to the ground immediately after launch inside Iran. Even with the massive destruction of Iranian missile launchers, Iran still has the ability to launch its rockets from underground bases. However, this option is relatively inflexible, and due to the fixed location of these sites, as well as AI-enabled reconnaissance capabilities, it is not ideal for avoiding counterstrikes. Here we see images of the destruction of such an Iranian underground facility. While this does not necessarily have to be a launch site, it could also be a production facility or a storage site, but you get my point. Of course, not all of the missiles were a complete failure. For example, in the first days of the attack, several US military bases were hit, including facilities of the United States Fifth Fleet in Bahrain as well as a base in Erbil in Iraqi Kurdistan. These impacts were documented both by circulating video footage and by satellite images released afterwards. According to reports, some of the missiles did cause limited damage to infrastructure and facilities on the affected bases. I will get to the satellite images in just a moment. Drone strikes also targeted logistical infrastructure such as ports in the Gulf, as shown here in Oman. The damage here also appears to be limited so far. What could of course become a problem in the long term are the strikes on energy infrastructure, especially by drones. However, even individual missiles can have serious consequences, as shown in this video, which as of March 5 shows one of the latest such strikes, a ballistic missile attack on the Babco refinery in Bahrain. Continued successful strikes on energy infrastructure in the Gulf could have significant regional and global consequences. Even limited damage to refineries, export terminals, or loading facilities can disrupt oil and gas flows, create uncertainty in energy markets, and drive up global prices. Because a large share of the world's oil exports passes through Gulf infrastructure, repeated attacks could also force temporary shutdowns, increase insurance and shipping costs, and put additional economic pressure on both regional producers and the global economy. Combined with a blockade of the Strait of Hormuz, this is currently Iran's most impactful weapon of retaliation not only against Israel, the United States, and the Gulf states, but against the entire world. And should the air defense interceptor rate of the US and its allies really run low before Iran's strike capabilities are taken out for good, This could at least create the problem of continued disruptions through successful strikes like this for at least the next few months. This is currently the biggest issue I see here. However, if Iran's capabilities are sufficiently degraded, interceptor stockpiles could, as already mentioned, be conserved more from now on, allowing defenses to focus more on other forms of air defense, especially against the drones. But more on that in a moment. But first, I want to briefly return to the satellite images, because there were quite a few of them. Here we see one image showing the damage to the Saudi Aramco Ras Tanura facility after it was hit by an unknown projectile. And here we see images showing the damage to the US base in Manama, Bahrain, as well as Ali Al Salem Air Base in Kuwait. In both cases, the damage appears to be limited. Even Chinese satellite providers, who are currently not holding back with images documenting damage to US bases and other infrastructure, only show limited damage, as visible in this example image from Kuwait. Nothing catastrophic. The hardest hit site was this one here, as it has been reported that this was the location where 6 US service members were killed in action after it was struck, the only reported US fatalities of the war so far. In addition, there were several claims based on satellite imagery that multiple THAAD sites had been struck and that their radars had been damaged. However, the pictures used to support these claims were all extremely low quality, except for this one image that was said to show a THAAD site in the UAE. After a quick reverse image search, however, it becomes evident that no authoritative source has posted this picture, neither Western nor Chinese sources, which exposes this image with 99.9% certainty as an AI-generated fake. What is causing more problems for all sides involved than expected, aside from fake news, are the cheap Iranian drones whose interception in most cases is completely disproportionate to their cost. While expensive interceptor missiles do not necessarily have to be used against these drones, they still place a heavier burden on air defenses than many anticipated. This is either due to the need to scramble fighter jets or helicopters, or because they strain smaller SHORAD systems. There are interceptor drones that can take over this task, and countries like the UAE already possess such systems, as I have shown in previous videos. However, the technology is still very new, and so far only Ukraine has developed significant know-how in this field. The Ukrainians have apparently already been asked for assistance in this area, and President Zelensky had the following to say about it.
Партнери звертаються до нас, до України, щоб ми допомогли із захистом від шахедів, з експертизою, з реальною роботою. Були запити щодо цього і від американської сторони. Зараз цими днями я говорив з лідерами Еміратів, Катару, Бахрейну, Йорданії, Кувейту. Будуть ще перемовини з іншими регіональними лідерами. Ми координуємося з нашими партнерами в Європі. Звісно, будь-яка наша допомога, тільки за умови, що це не зменшить наш власний захист в Україні. І що це буде інвестицією в наші дипломатичні можливості. Ми допомагаємо захист від війни тим, хто допомагає нам, Україні, наближати достойне завершення війни.
European forces are also taking part in the fighting in a defensive role. French Rafale fighter jets have been actively operating over the Emirates, and the French aircraft carrier Charles de Gaulle is currently being moved into position. British fighter jets are also taking part in the operation, and a British F-35 even achieved the first ever British air-to-air kill by shooting down an Iranian drone. But an Israeli F-35 also had a first-time moment when it shot down an Iranian Yak-130 fighter jet. Footage of the incident followed shortly afterward.
طيارات حربية أخو العيال.
On the first day of the Iran war, 3 American fighter jets were also shot down, as multiple videos documented. The aircraft involved were 3 separate F-15 fighter jets that were shot down, as the US military later confirmed. The jets, however, were not hit by surface-to-air fire as initially believed. They were not even struck by Iranian interceptor missiles, but instead became the victims of a friendly fire incident involving the Kuwaiti Air Force, which accidentally shot down all 3 aircraft with air-to-air missiles. Apparently, the Kuwaiti jets involved were FA-18s that brought the 15s down. All US pilots were able to eject safely and are now safe. There were also 2 videos released showing the encounters between 2 of the pilots and locals in different locations. one with a female fighter pilot and one with a male. The difference in how the pilots were received is quite hilarious in a good sense. I will play the videos in a second, one after another, but first a little bit of context. Apparently, the Kuwaitis in one instance thought that the American was an Iranian fighter pilot and therefore wanted to attack him. The woman, on the other hand, was welcomed quite friendly. One comment from a Kuwaiti that I sadly cannot find anymore explained the difference in behavior because of this. Apparently, the woman landed in a better neighborhood of Kuwait, while the man dropped straight into the hood and the locals were quick to respond after they thought he was Iranian. Quite a cool backstory if true. But what do you think?
You're fine? Really? You need something to help you? No problem, you're safe. You're safe, you're safe. Everything good? No problem. Thank you for helping us. Everything perfect? Go! Done! محمد ارجع يا محمد American
As part of Operation Epic Fury, the Americans have also deployed a number of new weapon systems. As the War Zone reported, one of them is the new Black Tomahawk missile. This is a newer, more advanced and low observable variant of the Tomahawk land attack cruise missile. The other one is the Lucas one-way attack munition, essentially the American counterpart to the Shahed drone. One of these drones went down in Iraq, and the wreckage showed that it was equipped with a Starlink antenna. Lucas stands for Low-Cost Uncrewed Combat Attack System. It is a loitering munition/one-way attack drone developed in the United States as a response to the widespread use of systems like the Shahed 136 used by Iran and Russia. The idea behind Lucas is to provide the US military with a cheap, mass-producible strike drone that can be deployed in large numbers to overwhelm air defenses or strike targets far behind enemy lines. The third system is the new PRSM that gets fired here from a HIMARS missile launcher to strike targets in Iran. The PRSM, short for Precision Strike Missile, is the US Army's next-generation long-range tactical ballistic missile designed to replace the older Attack-M's missile. It has a range of over 400 to 500 kilometers, with future versions expected to exceed 1,000 kilometers, and does so with high precision while being guided by modern navigation systems to strike high-value targets such as command centers, radar sites, or missile launchers. In terms of the overall state of operations after 1 week so far, Trump gave this assessment.
They have no Navy, it's been knocked out. They have no Air Force, it's been knocked out. They have no air detection, that's been knocked out. Their radar has been knocked out. And just about everything's been knocked out. They're going to be in for a lot of hurt. These are bad people. I have to go back and look at the war. You know, have a lot of things happening.